happening, and I'm your host, Mark Passio. Talking about the ways that consciousness manifests. We were discussing the internal, compares and contrasts with the external manifestation, the masculine manifestation of human consciousness. So, let's get right back into that. Maybe we'll take some calls later in the hour. So I was talking, it's associated with the moon, okay, symbolically. And it's feminine. It's a feminine energy because it is indwelling. Okay, this is an internal aspect of our consciousness, of our makeup. It's intuitive. Okay, it's a passive element. It isn't very active. It's associated with the night. Okay, and basically, this quality of consciousness is directly related to our emotions. Our emotions are the internal quality of consciousness within us. The yang consciousness, the male energy, the masculine form of consciousness, it's solar. That's the symbolic way that it is depicted as the sun. It is an active quality. It's logical and analytical, and it is dominant. Okay, it is not passive or submissive. It is a more aggressive or dominant energy, and this energy is all about our actions in the world. This is all about how we make our consciousness manifest to others through our actions. You've heard the saying, you will know them by their actions. And that is certainly true. We have to strive, if we want to become more conscious, to bring these two qualities into unison and balance with each other within ourselves. So, we have to strive to become beings that,
this is some bullshit. I have no money.
So
I can't do the clemency thing.
and that our
What am I
actions
supposed to do?
aren't in contradiction or opposition with how we really
Fucking
feel
notorious.
inside. So if I feel something is wrong, it's not morally correct, it's not morally justifiable, and I do it anyway, for whatever reason, the reason does not matter. I'm in opposition with myself. Doesn't make a difference what the reason is. Justifications and excuses really, at the end of the day, do not hold any water. Okay? That's all they are.
Time for a dab.
If we continue to take actions that we actually believe aren't morally justified, we really should not be doing, we know that deep down inside, then we are in a state of internal opposition with ourselves, with our own consciousness. And for that very reason, that is why we're largely experiencing the negative and uncomfortable and often painful situations that we're experiencing in the world today. Because we are in a state of internal opposition with ourselves. We have to strive to make these two qualities into one within us. And there's many different methodologies for doing that. I'm going to get into eventually on this show practical grassroots solutions for affecting real change in our lives. But I want to, there is a solution for every problem that is out there. There really is a solution. And there's a formula for problem solving. That's what we're ultimately really looking for. We're really striving to find the solution to this problem. And you can know all you want about the problem. You can learn more and more and more and more about the chains that you're held in. But ultimately, if you're not looking for the way out of those chains, what is the difference how much you know about the chains? Okay? It's a step. It is a first step. You do have to understand how the problems manifest. Okay? But we ultimately have to strive for solutions. And the way we get down to that problem solving is by finding enough information about the ultimate nature, the core nature of the problem. And the core nature of the problem that we face is that we do not ultimately know ourselves. We do not ultimately know enough about human consciousness and the way it works. And that is a manipulator's dream scenario. If you have a person or a group of people who do not really understand how they work, they don't understand how their mind works, they don't really understand how their emotional makeup works, maybe they're not a very emotionally developed person, okay? You're in a position to completely manipulate and control their behavior because you know more about their makeup and how they work than they do. And I guarantee you, think of it like this. Here's a great metaphor for this. Imagine a psychologist who has studied the human mind and the psyche more than anyone. Let's say this is one of the most advanced psychologists that has ever lived. He has done more work and delving into the human psyche than anyone else before him. Let's say he had a friend that for whatever reason, you can make up whatever reason you want, he started really despising. He had some kind of a problem with him. Maybe he became aware that the friend did something to him behind his back, and he really wanted to get back at that person. Okay? How much of a number do you think a psychologist like that would be able to do with a person that he became very close to and became close with in life? How much of a number, knowing what he knows about the mind and the psyche, do you think he would be able to do on that other individual? I guarantee you he could practically make life a living hell for him. And that's ultimately what the nature of the problem that we're faced with in the world today is really all about. You could look at the manipulators of this world, you could look at the occultists, the dark occultists of this world who use their knowledge of how the natural law systems of consciousness work in this world. They use them as weapons against people who do not possess that knowledge. And that places them in a position of higher ground in warfare. You know what happens when someone gets the higher ground. You know, you could look at it like a chess game. Chess requires a lot of different elements, you know, coming together for someone to really be an excellent chess player. You have to really know the game. You have to know how the laws of the game work, right? You can't just make moves wherever you want. You have to know, well, you know, how the pieces move on the chessboard. This could be called natural law. Natural law is simply how the system that we're in does work. Whether we believe it, accept it, or not, there are laws that bind this place that we are inextricably bound to and by. And if we break them, we suffer. And if we come into harmony with them, if we harmonize with them, then we don't suffer. That will be a hard, bitter pill to swallow for many people. He understands that, you know? He understands how the pieces move and the moves that they're capable of making. But he has other qualities in his arsenal. He has a knowledge of the opponent. Knowledge of the opponent. A good chess player has to know who he's sitting down and playing against. He has to know whether they know as much about the game as he does. He has to know what their strategy is. More importantly, he has to know what their motivations stay several steps ahead of them. He has to have a sense of timing, to know when to make certain moves. Okay? And he definitely has to be able to put out whatever is necessary to get the job done. So he has to have a sense of duty, if you like, or a call to sacrifice. You might need to sacrifice certain pieces to put yourself in a position where you want to be. And I think we'll talk about different events throughout history as human sacrifices. We'll get into 9/11 as a human sacrifice event to advance an agenda forward in this game that's being played. And we'll get into that in weeks ahead. So these are the qualities that go into playing a good game of chess. That's the necessary formula. And I would suggest that the manipulators of the world have all of these qualities. And to a very great extent, most of the people that they are working against, that they are attempting to control, do not have many of these qualities in place. As a matter of fact, most people don't even know there's a game being played that haven't even shown up. So what this show is going to be a call to is trying to get more of those people to show up at the game board and hopefully work our way up to a higher position so we are not pawns in the game being played. Okay? We can't let ourselves be played in this game like pawns. See, we have to become the masters of this game. The chess master isn't on the board. The chess master isn't on the game board floor. Right? When you sit down, if you're a chess master, you're not actually walking onto the board. You're sitting down in a chair, and your perspective is higher than the board. You can look down onto the board because you're at a higher level. That's what we need to become. See, sadly, most people are those pieces. Most people are those pieces. And most people are the pawns in the game. And don't even know it. They don't even know that they have strings tied to them. And that where they're being told to move is a completely controlled function. And the chess master is moving them at his discretion and at his own personal will. And most people never, ever see the strings that have them tied down. And they never see that they're a pawn in that game. That they're wanderers on that board, that checkered board. We'll talk about the symbolism of the checkered floor, okay? The black and white squares, right? That's the game board floor where if you're on it and that's your level of consciousness, you don't know that you're being played. And you're basically a piece that is being positioned by a master who exists at a level much higher than you. You're a wanderer. You don't really know which is those black and white squares representing light and dark. You really don't know which is which. It's all from your perspective. You can only see one or maybe two squares ahead of you, but you can't see the whole game. You can't pull back and see the whole picture. That's what ultimately I'm trying to get people to do, is pull back, see the really bigger picture. Not even from the box that most of us bring to the table, because many of us bring boxes to the table when it comes to looking at what really is and looking at the truth. We want to, some of us may even want to look at what the truth is, but we strive to fit it into the pre-existing ways that we had of looking at reality. We try to say, well, I previously thought this, and I now have taken in this new information. How can I get it to jive with the belief system that I previously held? Okay? And a big, big part of this will be religion. Okay? is something that there's so much evidence that this is a manipulation and form of mind control. And yet you hear many people that never want to admit to that and don't look into the basis and the formulation of their religions and how that is also a form of mind control. So people bring different boxes to the table. The boxes are of all shapes and sizes and colors and materials, but newsflash, the truth does not fit in a box. So if you're bringing a box to the table, eventually, at some point, this show is going to make you feel uncomfortable. And I wanted to do that because the truth, again, does not fit in a box, and anybody trying to stuff it into a box is going to be sorely disappointed. So let's get back into our discussion about self-knowledge. Self-knowledge is what we need. We need consciousness, the ability to recognize patterns of information, the ability to recognize what is taking place both within us and around us in the external reality that we experience and share with others. So, consciousness, at its core, has a dual nature. Masculine qualities. How this manifests in each individual, in each individual unit of consciousness, let's call it, in different mystical traditions, the word monad is often used. The one that is the expression of the all. And there are many monads. Each individual has their own unique expressed consciousness, even though we're all part of the one unified ocean of consciousness that exists in the universe. But getting down to the breakdown of the monad, the individual unit of consciousness, or an individual being, there are basically three expressions. And if you sit and really think about this, you really give it some deep thought, there really are only three ways that your consciousness can express itself in the reality that we live in. Think about it. You really can only experience three different manifested forms of consciousness. The ways that you make yourself known to other people. And these are through your thoughts, your emotions, and your actions. Your thoughts, your emotions, and your actions. The thoughts can be looked at as the primary expression of consciousness. They are an emanation. Okay? They're not really male or female. They just are. They're not an internal nor an external manifestation. They are an essence. So that's a fundamental basis of consciousness. Thought activity. Look at that as our creator aspect. Okay? We have a creator aspect within us. Okay? And that is our thoughts. It has been said that the universe itself is mental. It is comprised of thought energy. Everything that we experience ultimately had to derive at some place in the past as a thought. Okay? A fork, an eating implement. Okay? Someone had to think, I want to make something to use as an eating implement and devise something that we now know as a fork. But the thought had to arise first. And this is with anything. Any action we take has to ultimately arise as a thought. Any piece of technology that we make had to arise as a thought. Any series of events that we experience had to exist first in the thoughts of the people who made that event occur. The second aspect of consciousness, as it manifests in our reality, is our emotions. Our emotions are the internal aspect of our consciousness. These are the ways that we aspect, and then you have the internal feminine motherly aspect. Our emotions are the spirit in which we do things, right? They're the spirit in which we do things. Just like in the Trinity, we call this aspect the Holy Spirit. Okay, so thoughts, that's the root, the essence, the primary essence of consciousness, and that is the creator aspect. The emotions, the internal feminine aspect of consciousness, that's the spirit aspect. Okay, so we have the mind, and now we have the spirit. And then the third quality of consciousness, the third aspect, is our actions. What we actually do with what we know in our mind, the thought aspect, and what we carry within us in our emotional makeup, our spirit. Both of these two things then create a synthesis called our behavior, the actions that we take in the world in relation to others. And this is the child of our thoughts and our emotions. So if we look at the thoughts as a creator aspect of our consciousness, that basically expresses the mind. We look at the emotions as the sacred feminine quality of our consciousness that expresses the spirit. We can look at our actions as the divine child, or the byproduct of these two other qualities of consciousness that basically determine are, again, it's the yang quality of consciousness, which is a masculine energy. So we could look at this as a divine male child. Hopefully some people will see where I'm going with this analogy and breakdown. This is the Trinity. This is the creator. This is the divine mother and the divine child. Okay, but the divine mother could also be considered the spirit, the Holy Spirit. So, this also gives us the mind, body, and spirit connection. Because again, our thoughts are how our mind manifests, the actions are what we do with our body, and the emotions are our internal quality and our internal makeup, the sacred feminine quality, which is our spirit, the spirit in which we do things. This concept that I have just described in different mystical traditions has been called the law of three, or the triune aspect of human consciousness. Triune means three in one. Three in one. And of course, you can see the analogy to different mystical traditions and different religious notions of a trinity in many different cultures. So, the next thing that I want to talk about here tonight is how the inside human physiology. And this is critical toward understanding how people are manipulated. And if we don't get any callers, if we have some callers that are going to give the call-in number one more time. If we do get callers, I will take some calls during this hour. If we don't get callers, I'm just going to continue to get into the physiological aspects of consciousness through a breakdown of the human brain for the rest of this show. So if we get some callers, maybe we'll take some. If not, I'll just continue on with an analysis of the physiology and the human brain and how that relates with our consciousness, and that's what we'll do for the remainder of the show. So, the human brain is part of the discovery of self. Yet, if you go to an average person on the street, or even in your family, or your other friends, many people do not really understand.
Alright, I gotta get something to eat, so there won't be much gameplay. Like and subscribe, guys. Appreciate it.
The makeup of the brain, they don't understand how the brain works. They don't understand what qualities of their personalities the different components of the brain drives or gives rise to. And this is extremely and exceedingly sad, because if somebody doesn't understand how the most sacred gift that they have ever really been given, I would say, aside from free will, but let's put it this way, this is how your free will manifests itself. If you don't have a brain, you're really not going to be able to manifest much free will. So I think the greatest gift that we're ever really given in the universe is our free will. And I think to understand the human brain is to really understand ourselves and how we are a gifted species by even possessing a brain of the order and magnitude that we do have. So that's why I think it's critical for our understanding of what's going on in the world, to understand what is going on in our own brain. And the first way we need to do that is by basically understanding basic structures within the brain. I'm not going to get super technical, and I'm not going to go into any kind of high-level neuroscience. All I want to do is basically break down some of the structures in the brain and get people to understand how these structures are directly connected and tied with fundamental human motivations. Okay? So, the oldest part of the human brain and the simplest structures of the human brain are in the lowest parts of the brain. The actual height-wise, the lowest part. Now think about how interesting that is. It's like saying a foundation of a house, which is the part that is laid down first, is at the lowest level of the house. Of course, that's true. Okay? Because you can't build something on top of it if you don't have the foundation there to begin with. So this base part of the brain is called the R complex. The R complex. Letter R and the word complex. And the letter R stands for reptilian. The reptilian complex. Otherwise, more simply called the reptile brain. So right there, I'll bet you most people were unaware, inside of you have a reptile brain. You do. This part of the brain is the controller of physical activity. Motor skills are controlled by the R complex of the brain. The R complex is basically two components. It's the brain stem, which connects to the spinal column. And behind that, near the back of the head, there is a region called the cerebellum. These two components of the brain govern motor skills. They govern motor skills. Without this part of the brain, you would not be able to move. You would not be able to move your arms and legs. You would not be able to walk. You would not be able to talk. You would not be able to basically do anything that involves moving any of the muscles of your body. So it's a critically important part of the brain. You need this part of the brain to do anything in the world, basically. However, it governs some basic primitive behaviors that we all experience and display at one point or another in our lives. This part of the brain governs the fight or flight mechanisms of the consciousness. See, when we were a less evolved being, we engaged predators that we had to make a decision about. Did we have enough ability to stand and fight them, given the situation or the tools or weapons that we had? Or would we have to flee from them in order to survive? Because this part of the brain, the R complex, is all about survival. It's all about what we need to do to survive. It governs eating, okay, sleeping. Anything that we need to do to survive in the physical world that we live in. And the fight or flight response is about what we do when our survival is threatened. What happens during this state of mind, this fight or flight response, is the heart begins to pump blood very quickly, and it's pumping it away from two areas of the body and toward two other areas of the body. Okay? So when we go into fight or flight response, which is otherwise called stress, this is commonly referred to in the modern world as stress. Okay? When we go into this modality of consciousness, the R complex of the brain sends instructions to the human heart, and it says pump blood faster. Pump it away from the torso and the head. Now think about that. Blood begins to pump vigorously away from the torso and the head. So in the torso is all of our vital organs. In the head is the brain. Okay? So richly oxygenated blood is not being sent during times of stress, otherwise called fight or flight response. It is not being sent actively to the torso or to the head, to the brain. Why? Well, during times of making a decision about whether you're going to fight or run away, once that decision is made, you're choosing either to stand and fight or to run, because you're in a situation where you're being preyed upon. You don't need blood in those areas of the body. That's not the top priority in that given situation. Blood needs to go to the extremities. You're not going to sit and do any conceptual thinking if you're under attack by, let's say, a mountain lion. You're not going to think about deep conceptual ideas or philosophical ideas. You're also not going to do much digestion in that state or any other functions that the internal organs go to work on to process food and other nutrients in the body. That's not a priority either at that time. What is a priority? What is a priority in a state of consciousness like that is you need to either have a lot of energy in your arms because you're going to need to be using them to fight off your attacker. So your arms muscles have to get all of that richly oxygenated blood so that they can become hard and that they can have energy to be wielded as weapons in the battle that you're about to be in. Conversely, if you make the decision to run away, lots of richly oxygenated blood needs to drive the muscles of your legs so that you can flee the situation as fast possible in order to survive. Think about that in strategic survival terms. It makes so much sense. It makes so much sense once we understand that that's the mechanism that is really going on in our bodies, and that the brain is driving that. Okay? You don't need the blood in the head or torso during a moment of attack. You need it in the extremities so you can either fight or run away. Now, that makes sense in a situation where you're fighting an attacker or a mountain lion. However, in the modern world, where do we see this happening most frequently? We're not really in many situations where we actually physically need to make a decision to fight somebody or to flee. Okay? In certain instances, yes, that is the case, but in general, where this mechanism of the brain is activating and going to work most frequently is when we are engaged in stressful activities. And we're almost always engaged in stressful activities, particularly in Western cultural life. So, unfortunately, this places us at an even greater disadvantage. This is actually an advantageous survival adaptation technique in the brain, which has become a detriment in modern society, because what we're doing with this function is we're essentially staying in through most of the days, most of the hours of the days that we live. We are staying in this construct of consciousness. We're living in the reptile brain most of the time. Most people are living in the reptile brain most of the time, because it's one thing to the next. A hectic, busy lifestyle, a job, dealing with children, dealing with physical tasks and activities, traffic, other people during the day that we don't want to deal with and interact with. It's a constant struggle and a constant engaging in the reptile brain. And this is what we call stress. Now, in a context where there is no ability to either fight or run away, and therefore use it and then go back to normal brain function, we're essentially being trapped in that reptile brain throughout most of our lives as a culture. And this does very harmful things to the other structures of the brain, which I'm going to get into in the last 15 or 20 minutes of the show today. So the mammal brain is the next part of the brain I'm going to talk about. So we have a reptile brain, and it's the base brain, and it governs survival and fight or flight response. Okay? The mammal brain, also called the limbic system, governs our emotional makeup. It governs the chemical interactions through which we experience our emotions. The limbic brain governs the chemical interactions through which we experience what we call our emotions. Again, sacred feminine, internally felt quality of consciousness. Okay? So our emotional makeup is largely directed through. It's not derived by, it doesn't come to be because of the limbic brain or the mammal brain, but that's how the emotions basically get to a place where they can affect the physiology. They act through the mammal brain or the limbic brain. And this is the sacred feminine part of the brain. This is called the midbrain. Middle chamber. Some people will recognize that concept. So, without this part of the brain, we could feel no emotions. Think of it in relation to a reptile. It doesn't have a mammal brain, a mammalian brain. They only have a reptilian brain. They are a creature of instinct. Again, survival. Cold-bloodedness is a feature of a reptile. They don't really experience emotions the way mammals experience a chimpanzee really experience emotional states that are quite different than a crocodile. A crocodile is largely a creature of instinct. You can see a chimpanzee become sad, or a dog become sad, and many other emotional states. Now, that's what we share in common. We share these two brains in common with different species in the animal kingdom, with reptiles and with mammals. There's a part of the brain that really makes us unique, and actually in a higher level of organization and consciousness, and that is the human brain. And this is what most people think of when they think of the brain. They think of the gray matter part of the brain. And this is basically called the telencephalon. The gray matter section of the brain is called the telencephalon. The part of the brain where most of the neural activity takes place for human thought is in the outer portion, the outer layer of the telencephalon. And this is called the human neocortex. The neocortex. This part of the brain governs all higher order thinking of an individual. Every quality that really makes us, we have as a result of having a highly developed neocortex. The neocortex is bilaterally symmetrical, and I've already talked a bit about this and brought up a little bit about the left and right brain. We have a left brain and a right brain. The left brain is the male aspect of the brain. It governs analytical thought, logic, scientific thought, mathematical thought. It governs our use of words and language. Okay, so the left brain hemisphere, these are all the functions that it deals with, that it makes possible. And this is the neocortex we're talking about, the higher order thought center of the brain. All the functions that really make us human and separate us from the other animals. This is the part of the brain that governs those functions. The other side of the human neocortex is called the right brain. This is the yin energy, the feminine qualities of the human makeup can be found by looking into the functions of the right brain. The right brain governs intuition, simple knowing, without really understanding how one knows, the gut feeling, an intuitive quality. It governs creativity, so the way we express our thoughts and emotions through art, through music, through all other forms of creative expression, creative writing and dance and things like that. We're really engaging the right brain when we engage in creative ideas and creative activities. And then holistic thought, the idea that we are essentially one, that there is relationship between us and others, and that we're not separate. This idea largely derives out of the right brain functions. And this is why we say when we talk about the right brain, we're in our right mind, or we're not in our right mind. We don't have a connection to this part of the brain. We're not really in our right mind, so to speak. It's not just a play on words. It actually has a basis in the fundamental physiology of the human brain. So if we go back to the metaphor that I started talking about earlier in this show, we talked about consciousness and how it has a threefold aspect. Well, just as consciousness has a threefold aspect, our thoughts, our emotions, and our actions, our brain also has a triune nature. They call scientists and neuroscientists call this the triune brain. It's the three in one again, triune. Okay? You have the reptile brain, the mammal brain, and the human brain. We are basically three beings in one. And there is a hierarchy to this. There is a way that information should be processed according to this threefold or triune Okay? In neuroscience, that's what they call it. It means that your left brain and right brain hemispheres are both firing in unison and in harmony. And the neural activity and the electrochemical synaptic activity is fully working and is fully alive and lit up in all the hemispheres, in both hemispheres of the brain, all across the hemispheres. In other words, this is a brain that is firing on all cylinders, so to speak. It is a lit up mind. It is a person who lives in balance within themselves. And as such, they're capable of really living in balance with others and with their environment. See, the human brain is designed to be the executive command center of the whole brain complex. It is the part of the brain, again, that deals with higher order thought. You could look at it as, if you have a company, you have a CEO of a company, you have a person that really makes the critical executive decisions. Well, this part of the brain governs reason, and it governs the way we use our actions in balance with our emotions. So if we have a balanced neocortex and not one side dominates the other, we don't have an imbalance to the left brain hemisphere, and we don't have an imbalance to the right brain hemisphere, we become a person that is capable of higher order thought, conceptual thinking, and reasonable behavior, meaning behavior that is governed by through the ability to reason and recognize patterns and recognize meaning with respect to patterns. This is the greatest gift that our species possesses. There is no more complex object in the known universe than the frontal portions of the human neocortex. None. It is the most advanced supercomputer that we will probably ever know of or discover. This is the most advanced computer that exists, and it is the most complex substance that we know of. And it's sitting right behind your eyes. Think about that. Okay? Now, if that part of the brain is working properly, we are in touch with the sacred feminine component of the brain structures, which is the limbic brain or the mammal brain, otherwise called the midbrain. This is always sending data upward toward the neocortex. Okay? Think about it. The spiritual part of the brain, the sacred feminine part of the brain that governs our emotions, is always trying to send data upward to the reasoning functions of the brain. The logical and analytical left brain and the creative, nurturing, and intuitive right brain. Always receiving instructions from the midbrain. Okay? So if the brain is functioning properly, that's how it works. And then, through the neocortex, we'll send instructions back down to the motor centers of the brain, the reptile brain, so that we use our actions governed by reason. Okay? Think about how this works. Really let it absorb. This is critical information to understand if we are going to understand how we work. If we don't understand how we work, we're completely subject to manipulation and mind control. And this is ultimately about becoming a being that governs oneself and is not subjected to the control of the mind through other people attempting to usurp and control one's mind and behavior. That's what this is ultimately about. And if we're going to do that, we have to understand how we work. And one of the best ways to do this is to understand the basics of neuroscience function and the basic structures of the human brain. So, what happens when we're constantly in the reptile brain? either imbalanced toward one brain hemisphere or the other brain hemisphere. Well, it's interesting because different things happen depending on the nature of the imbalance. And what I'll start to get into a little bit next week is I will talk about the different methodologies, different methods of mind control that go to work on the different sides of the brain. Okay? Because these are targeted functions. These are targeted methodologies, the mind control that is used against us. And there's two big ones in particular, which I'll get into. And I will explain how one of them goes to work on the left brain, one of them goes to work on the right brain. One of them holds back the left brain, one of them holds back the right brain.
Well, you know I have a viewer. What's up?
Methodologies of mind control are geared and devised to throw people into
I hope you're enjoying the broadcast.
or the other, either completely left brain functions or completely dwelling in right brain functions. And this is a dangerous trap to fall into, and I would say 95% or better of people really are in one of these states of imbalance or another, either imbalance toward the left brain hemisphere or the right brain hemisphere. So I think what I'll basically do to wrap this show up, I think instead of trying to get into all of that right now, let's leave it where we have it for now. I'm kind of a little bit disappointed that we didn't get to take any callers, but unfortunately it looks like no one called into the switchboard. Let's see if we could get some callers in next week. I'd really be happy to take some of your calls and get some of your thoughts on these ideas. But for now, I'm going to wrap it up here and just give you some of the websites where you can listen to this show and many other great shows as well. Another big thanks to Bob Tuskin for getting me started on the Revolution Broadcasting Network. His show is going to be coming up at 10 p.m. on the East Coast. And my website, you can go to and check out some of these ideas and listen to and watch many hours of presentations and lectures about these concepts and many others. I get into all of the breakdown of consciousness. I get into the methods of mind control. I get into solutions. That's ultimately what we're going to talk about as we go forward on this radio show. And my website is whatonearthishappening.com. Whatonearthishappening.com. I'll be here every Tuesday and Thursday night on Revolution Broadcasting at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. Catch you next time. Thank you for listening.
Thanks everybody. Like and subscribe. Peace out.